it's a commitment of service. You become a living sacrifice for to your community, and you sacrifice your family, you sacrifice your health. It's like you're on deployment for 20 to 30 years, and you become someone different. You kind of become, and I think some people want it for the nobility of it, but if it's not in their heart and it just doesn't fit right, when firefighters do not feel valued, that's when you fall out of love of the job.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the First Things First, a show where we talk about setting our priorities in the right order to help you fall in love with the job again. My name is Helton Pereira. I'm your host, and today I am joined by my friend, Jimmy Pellitteri. Jimmy, how are you doing, brother?
Glad to be here.
Good, good. So, Jimmy, you've been in the fire department for a short period of time, right? You did 35 years in the fire service. You are retired now. You're a battalion chief in the Gurney Fire Department. So tell us where's Gurney? Is it a big department, small department? Tell us a little bit about that.
Gurney is a smaller department compared to some larger departments. In our area, though, we're probably we are the second busiest in the county. So we're outside of Chicago. We're in Chicagoland. We really sit between Milwaukee and Chicago by the lakefront of Lake Michigan. We run about 8,000 calls a year, a little over 8,000 calls a year. When I first started, we had one station, and now we have three stations. Our staffing is a minimum of 15, 19 per shift when I left, and that was about 6 months ago. So my guys take a beating, and gals, I should say. They're busy per person for sure. We run a lot. We're busy. God brought that department to me, and it's been a blessing in so many ways. So it's been good.
Were you the kid who always wanted to be a firefighter growing up? Did you have the fire trucks? Did you wear the fire hat?
Yeah, I don't remember because I don't know if I remember if I wore like a fire hat or anything, but I grew up originally in Deerfield Beach, Florida, down in it's by Fort Lauderdale on the East Coast, and there was a firefighter. I think he was an officer, friends of my parents, Mr. Holloway, we called him, and he came by in a fire truck when I was a kid one day and to visit us and to show us the truck, and my eyes were big. And ever since I was little, I felt like God put a calling on my heart, and I always wanted to be a firefighter. From the beginning of time, as far as I can remember of my time anyway, and I felt like God put it there, and it has been a blessing. And I believe this: there are firefighters that are called if they know God or not, and there are firefighters that have called themselves. And when that happens, it really doesn't work out. It's like they're wearing shoes on the wrong feet, and they're just miserable in the calling, so to speak. And they're just not meant to be there, and they usually don't last long. I've seen in my career anyway. It's the perspective.
So it's interesting you said that, and we didn't plan to talk about this. But is it okay for me to join the fire department just for the sticker and the T-shirt? Do you think that that's a reason that's good enough, or do you think that I surely should be called to do this?
Because I think what we were talking a little bit before we got rolling here is it's a commitment of service. It is. I think you become a living sacrifice for 20 to 30 years to your community, and you sacrifice your family, you sacrifice your health to a certain degree, your mental health, the taxing physical demands of the job on your body. It's just brutal. It's like you're on deployment for 20 to 30 years. We were talking earlier too, and with us, our staffing was short. So 48s and forcebacks are plentiful where I came from. Most guys work more 48s, it seems, than just 24s. And you just miss so much out on normal life. And you become someone different. You kind of become dead behind the eyes. You see life from a different perspective, I think, as a first responder, police, fire, a paramedic, whatever it is. You realize how short life is because you see so many bad things happen. You see so much death, and it unveils, like life can become meaningless almost because you just know you're going to die one day or the other. No one anticipates calling us in their day. In other words, it's not in in their phone, like, hey, at 9:05 today, we're going to call 911 because, I'm going to have a heart attack or my kid's going to get hit by a car, that sort of thing. No one plans on it. And we see the worst of the worst, and we're expected to have it all together. And I think some people want it for the nobility of it. And I think their mind is right to want it. But if it's not in their heart and it just doesn't fit right, I just feel like it just doesn't work out for them. And unfortunately, a handful of people get through it, and they figure out sometime either they're miserable their whole career. I find, and they make it to get their pension or whatever the case may be, or give them a decent amount of service, but they weren't meant to do it, and they just create more havoc for themselves, it seems. But the people that are called are meant to be there, and I think you can just see that in the difference in how they carry themselves, and how I think there's one thing: if a firefighter wants to be great, mission first. And the mission can get tarnished, you can get jaded, and when that happens, you lose your grip on the reality of why you're there. And when firefighters do not feel valued from within their own department, with their own company, with their own officers, with their own firefighters, that's when they become, we talked about, I think that's when you fall out of love of the job. If you don't have love and respect in the firehouse for each other, from the top, from the chief on down to the most junior firefighter, you're going to lose something, and you're going to lose value in the mission. And you become defeated, because firefighters really never ask for help, because they always give help. We're the ones who solve problems. And so it's a very lonely attribute, I think, or thing that happens to firefighters in the firehouse when they don't feel valued. And when you feel alone in your own firehouse, it can break the greatest of courageous of firefighters, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine balance of wanting to do it, whether it's for a t-shirt, whether it's for a sticker, whether it's for the money, or a lot of times too, there are guys and girls who will go for a certification, whether it's TRT or paramedic or hazmat, to try to get more money. And those certifications, it's a lot of hours to keep up with those certifications. And personally, I don't think that the money is enough. And that's when you get run to the ground, you're running a ton of calls, and it's just not worth it. And so that's when you're talking about, because we see so much of the negative side of life. We see the 1% of things that most people don't see, and that's when we end up getting beat up. Our health suffers, our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health suffers, and we end up in a pit of despair. That's when depression sets in, and substance abuse, and our health deteriorates. So how do we combat that? Were there things in your career that you walked through to try to combat those feelings?
For me, it started when I was young, because I grew up very different than most. I'll be brief, but I grew up in a very abused home. Yeah, I spent a lot of time. I was physically abused to where you had to go to the hospital, or you didn't go to the hospital, and injuries never got fixed. I was sexually abused. I was neglected, verbally abused, and there's a whole story in it. And when I was 18 years old, I mean, for me to become a firefighter, first of all, was a miracle. So God did that for sure. When I first became a Christian when I was 21, He made that happen. But I had to run away from my home when I was 18, because I didn't have the freedom to leave. So it was just that brutal for me. And then I'm dyslexic. I have a learning disability. So I have struggled from my past, the way I grew up. Just that depression in itself, where I wanted to take my own life, even when I was young, twice. I mean, I always was broken, but I was just like, man, there's no escaping them. Even when I ran away, they did terrible things. And there's a whole story in it. I mean, where they said I took things I didn't take. They said I stole. I thought I had made it. I was free, like 1,200 miles away from them, and I get arrested, for something I didn't even do. And I was labeled a felon, because of what they said. My dad, my stepdad was really my dad who raised me, and he was a Marine, and it was just brutal. But then I get into the fire service, and the fire service, to me, God used it, because that was when I first became a Christian. God just made that happen for me. And then the stuff you see, right? And the stuff you deal with. And then I think when I moved up through the ranks and became a battalion, I knew what was before the people I was leading. And I just knew what was ahead of them, things that they were experiencing. And I just never forgot where I came from. And not being able to take that away, and the stress and pressure of being hyper vigilant. Because like when I get off shift, I can't sleep. I don't know about you, but no good sleeping patterns for sure. You're used to waking up all the time. And then I would say for me, that helped me get through it is I wrote tons of poetry. I just did. I just had to unwind, even from firefighters to personal stuff with me and God and my family. I just would write. And I'm a runner and I'm a swimmer, and I would go run, and that would help me. And then I couldn't sleep. And then for me, with some, I don't know if I'd call it substance abuse, but some might. But I would drink wine or beer just to try and relax and go to sleep at night. And there was a period where I didn't drink at all, at all. And it was tough, the grind of the job. But when you show up at, like, the fire department I'm from, they're trying. There's some guys really trying to deal with mental health and all that. But I think to combat it in your firehouse is firefighters need to show love and respect for one another and just understand what they're going through. And I felt, as a battalion chief, I kind of created that environment. And the only way I could do that is realizing how much God loved me, and realize what a strong emotion love really is. Because most people see love as passive or weak, but it's the strongest. It drives out fear. It gives you confidence. It gives you a connection with people. And because there are firefighters, because you live together, you know how it is. You get on each other's nerves. So you're a family, and you just got to love them all. And it's always easy to love the good ones, but it's the hard ones that you need to reach into. And then you have to be a vessel, no matter what position you hold. You don't have to be a lieutenant, a captain, battalion chief. You just be a firefighter that just shows connection and love to each other, and it creates a bond that you're not in this alone. And it's interesting, how it affects you even later and after. Like, for me personally, I remember I was home, and I was just driving. This is after like 25 years on the job or something. I was going to a Bible study or something, and there was a car. It was a snowstorm up here. It happens all the time. Car in the ditch, right? And I remember, car in the ditch. County sheriff's there. No big deal. But I got cold sweats just seeing that. After everything else I've seen, just like, when is it? Why do people always have to have a bad day? That's all I was thinking. And it just affected me in a big way. And then as the commander in the position I held as a battalion, you're there for everyone else. And I think when you see your guys go through what they go through, and you see when they feel unsupported by the higher administration, you just have to make the firehouse the best way you can. And the worst thing you can do is be a firefighter in the firehouse that creates fear and tension, because when you do that, it creates hostility. And when you respond on calls, if that's already in the firehouse, that's going to come out on calls, and it just breaks down. And because most people don't want to say it, but I always told my firefighters, you are my heroes. When I became a battalion, like, I looked at them and all the commitment they made, just as busy as we were for the manning we had, it was insane how, it's relentless, absolutely relentless. And they would just make so much sacrifice. So I wanted to make the firehouse. Now, I never skated not having difficult conversations with firefighters or officers, but it was just, even as a firefighter, you have to have hard conversations, but you can do it with love and respect, and you shouldn't be afraid of doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Answered that
I
well or
love
not?
that. That's perfect, and that's exactly what I was going to get into, because I have heard you say on other podcasts that you liked not creating a culture of fear. As the battalion chief, you didn't want to come in and tell him what to do, or make him scared of you, and just have him obey rules, but you really try to not create a culture of fear. And the other thing that I heard you talk about also was creating a culture of accountability. And I love that you shared that. You even shared a story that you did that at the firehouse, but you also did that at home. So how did you reconcile the two of them, and creating that culture of accountability at the
Oh,
firehouse?
all right. Okay. Well, I'll start with home. I'll do that because it's kind of neat. It's like, because I really didn't have good role models for parents. Now, I married a preacher's kid. So my wife is, been married for 26 years coming up here. And so she comes from a total different background, right? And I was scared to get married. I was scared because I didn't even think I'd get married, to be honest, but God had different plans. So life is good. We end up blessed with two sons. And I remember I go to this thing about raising modern day knights, raising boys. And and it's like there's like 200 men there, right? It's all about fathers and stuff. And I was in my 30s probably at the time, and the age has just ranged from, guys in their 60s to young 20s. So, and then they dealt with parent wounds, right? And God had helped me forgive my parents and all that stuff. So I was in a good place, but I'm sitting around this table and we broke into small groups. There's 12 men. And there was people who grew up in Christian homes, just the perfect lives. And all of them, no matter where they came from, they all had issues with their parents. Everyone, their dads, their moms. And I'm just sitting there and I was in a good place because where God had healed me with a lot of that stuff. And I was thinking to myself, I pictured my son sitting at this table one day, and what would they say about me when they're men? And I thought, man, so I prayed and I said, Lord, man, I really want to figure this out. And they were young. My oldest was in kindergarten. So I said, listen, I'm going to try the best I can to be a great dad. I'm talking to him like he's 5. So however that looked back then. And I said, but I know I'm going to mess up, Michael. I'm going to do the best I can. But if I mess up, I want to give you permission that you can call me out. And eventually I did it with my second son who was old enough. So now, and I thought, well, they could use this to their advantage, right? You know how that is. Kids can work it. And I thought, well, we'll see. But there was not one time. And I remember it started went right soon after that. My wife and I got in an argument. I don't even know what it was about. And then I'm in my basement, what you see now. I'm sitting down here, and I was steaming about something. I don't know. I just came down here. My son comes down. He's 5. He goes, Daddy. He goes, and he goes, you need to go say you're sorry. And then I start talking to him like I'm talking to an adult, explaining, justifying my behavior. And then he goes, are you done? I go, yeah. He goes, when you're ready, come up and say you're sorry. So that just came on, and that they never used it to protect themselves. Like if I was difficult with one of them would say, I think you were a little aggressive with Joel. I said, all right, you're right. And I would own it. And that was the thing. You had to own it. If you make yourself vulnerable, you cannot let your pride come up and justify your behavior. And you, even in your frustration, they cannot fear you. My biggest thing for my kids was because I grew up in an atmosphere of fear, how I grew up. And there's so many stories to the story. You have no idea, and people have different pains. But I never wanted my kids or my wife to ever fear me. I just wanted them to know love. So then when I figured that out at home, God helped me transfer that into the firehouse as I was growing into my career. Because when I was young, I always wasn't like that. And I had some missteps for sure. And I had to go back and ask people for forgiveness. And I was willing to do that because I'm just like, if I could do this different, I would do it different. And then, so what I realized, especially when you become a battalion or you become a senior firefighter, you've been there a while, whatever it is, whatever your rank is, lieutenant, what have you, they all know your weaknesses. So why pretend they don't exist, right? In other words, if you want to know any of my weaknesses as a leader or as a man, ask my kids, ask my wife, go ask the firefighters I served with. They all know. So I never pretended they didn't exist. And and then I would welcome feedback from all of them on decisions I made or anything. On fire ground's a little different. You have to make some decisions, but you come back and maybe adjust later. But you have to own them. So if you are in a position of any type of leadership, informal, formalized, whatever, you can create a culture just by being transparent and say, man, I wish I could have done that different. I wish I could have done that better. And then people become accountable to each other. And I always encourage conversation. Like in my whole career as an officer, I give God the glory for this. I never had to formally discipline anyone. I had to have conversations. And I say, look, we can go in this direction. And when a third party was involved, other outside of my shift, the chief or whatever, And I had to battle for them. Like, man, I don't think they need to be written up for this. I think we can just do this through training, through conversation, because most often what I've learned, in this world of accountability, people get mad at someone's behavior when they fail, right? And all of a sudden, a chief, a fellow firefighter, they just blow up, and it happens. I get it, but I'm like, but you don't remember all the things they did right. I always looked at when I got an issue with one of my firefighters, how many things had they did right before I got that one issue? And usually the scale's like this. It just outweighs it. They've done so much right. So now I always split it like this though. If they're malicious, and I tried to create a culture where firefighters were not malicious. In other words, if their behavior became malicious and they were intentionally failing or not doing their duty, but I never had that, because I never modeled that. Like when a job had to be done, you just do it and do it to the best of your ability. So in the world of firefighting, there's about, in the United States, there's a little over 1 million firefighters, 1,100,000. 33% of them are career. The rest are either a volunteer or a combination of paid on call or whatever the case may be. And I started as volunteer, paid on call. I was willing to do this job for free. And I just know this. We serve with some of the best people God created. Firefighters are amazing people. And what happens in firehouses, in my opinion, people forget this in itself because it becomes like, well, it's our culture. But I think if you step back and just look at what firefighters do day in and day out within the organization and realize these are special people, and always evaluate the taxing service creates, and then you become accountable to your firefighters to make their lives the best it can be in the firehouse, and then you hope to connect with them in their personal lives, because they bring all that to work, they bring all that to the firehouse. If they're going through a divorce, you see it in their behavior, marital problems. I've seen so many firefighters, in my opinion, like myself, usually come from broken homes, and a lot of them absent dads or whatever the case. I would say a third to a half of the firefighters I served with, that was the case. And they were just trying to set the table right by becoming firefighters, like becoming noble. And then firefighters make some bad choices in their marriages, and their marriages were falling apart. But I didn't see one of them not want to save their marriage, even though if they couldn't, because they're rescuers. And I always say this: we go rescue strangers all the time. Why wouldn't we rescue each other? But too often our hearts get hard, or we get, difficult with each other. And it's the worst thing you can do. If you can make everyone just feel loved and respected when they come in, even if you have to have a hard conversation with them, and don't dodge the hard conversation, because if you do, it just festers. And then sometimes you have to be tactical about it. Like some things have to be addressed right away. But in my experience, that's not usually the case. Usually you can get, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to communicate this the best way I can, make sure they're in the right frame of mind to hear it. If they just come back from an awful call or whatever the case may be, I'm like, oh, this can wait till next shift. You just have to have that balance, and study. I think you can really become a culture of accountability that way.
That's awesome, Chief. You have a unique perspective that, not only as a battalion chief, but I want to bring you back to the beginning. I want to bring you back to the days that you just started in the fire service. In your case, you already shared and you alluded to that you had a hard time getting into the fire service because of your background. So share with us a little bit of that story, and I would love for you to share stepping into the firehouse the first time, and how it propelled you forward.
All right, so real quick, what happened was I have 4 siblings. My brother, he's a firefighter down in Florida, and he's a division chief down there in Broward County, where I grew up. Then there's me, and I have 2 sisters. So there was 4 of us. We're first born over here as far as immigrants go. They're from Sicily. And my mom and dad got divorced, right? So real strict Catholic Italian family type thing, but real close. A lot of the relatives, grandma, everyone lived by big Sunday dinners. But then my mom left with this guy, and then we ended up in Detroit. And it's a long story. They said we'd never see him. And they told my dad, "You'll never see him again," because she left us kids with my dad. And so my dad sent us up, my biological dad. And then we're in Detroit, and then abuse started to happen. My parents, my stepdad, which was really my dad at the time, and my mom, they were into drugs. They're poor, that sort of thing. And they moved us all over, so I never saw my family again. My older brother ran away within 3 months, went back to Florida, never saw him for like 10 years. So I was separated. So now I grew up in a very just all over the place, a lot of abuse, just wanting to get through life, just a lot of bitterness, a lot of rage. And I was destined to be a Marine as far as he was concerned. But he had broken my body so much. I went to MEP Chicago where I was going to get when I was 18, and they failed me the physical because my shoulders were so bad because he broke them so bad. So anyway, now this is what screwed me up. Okay, so my grades were terrible, barely got through high school. I'm dyslexic, no home support. But I would get in a lot of fights with my stepdad. My mom would beat me with things like with frying pans, all this stuff, breaking bones. I was just a mess. I mean, my body is so broken to this day. But you just things didn't heal right. If I went to the hospital, it was so bad. We moved so much, no one even tracked it. Back then they didn't see the abuse patterns, that sort of thing. And some things never just got healed right. And so anyway, and so I would get kicked out of the house and go live on my own. That was normal for a few days. Like, hey, we got in a big fight, too hostile to be here. So I'd go live at a friend's house or whatever the case may be. Well, anyway, this one time, I'm 18 now, and I didn't have the freedom to leave. So my mom was like, get out. And my stepdad had to go somewhere. He's like, you know the drill. So a friend's come. I had a motorcycle to get around on. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm all bloody and beat up because my mom hit me that day with an old telephone head and just whacked me in the face, cracked my nose open. And that was but I never hit my mom ever. I wanted to. I want to be honest about that. But so she knocks my motorcycle over as I'm loading some clothes into a friend's car. So I run up and I grab her like this at her shirt. And I was not a Christian. I hated God at the time because I'm like, if God was real, why would all this be happening to me? Because you're a victim of circumstance. I didn't choose this life, right? So I grab her. She goes, and I said, I let her go. I said, you're just not worth it. And she goes, well, I'm going to call the cops. And I'm like, this is new. Because I get beat all the time. I'm like, they're going to call the cops. But my stepdad, to his credit, he was a Marine, and I knew how to be respectful. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. That's what I did. I did have that. So I'm like, all right. So I go to my friend's house. I'm sitting on the front stoop, and I call the cops. I said, hey, my mom said she was going to call you. She's never done this. We got in a fight. If you have any questions for me, I just want you to know where I'm at. And they're like, okay, thank you for calling. Didn't think she would even call, but she had never done that. And it just made me like, well, I better do my part. So the cop comes over and I'm all bloody, right? It's on my shirt. It wasn't the worst I ever gotten, but it was pretty bad. So I just like, so the cop goes, are you Jimmy? I go, yes, sir. And his posture totally changed. And he goes, I have some bad news for you. I went, I saw your mom. Your mom told me this story, and I did not get your side of the story because I believed her. She was so convincingly that you had struck her and all this stuff that I can see now. There was not a mark on her. You're all bloody. You've been beat, but I had her sign a complaint. So I have to have you have to be arrested. So I had a battery. So strike one to be a firefighter. So, all right. So I get arrested. The cop was very cool. Cops get I had such great experience with cops during the hardest times of my life. I can't tell you enough. So this is one of them. So he takes me to the bank so I can get money. So I just have to spend one night in jail. And I can bail myself out. Okay. So I get out. Charges eventually dropped. They didn't show up in court. So it didn't have, you know what I mean? So I'm like, all right. So they just let it go. But then I'm beat again, and they realized they had control because I think they were afraid of me because I was the oldest in the home. I look back because I could really get them in trouble because I'm 18, but I lived in such fear. I can't even explain the fear. I couldn't even look a man in the eye. I was beaten down so bad. I mean, I got my licks in with my stepdad, but I would always lose in the end. It was just the way it was. I mean, the guy did 3 tours in Vietnam. He was a forced recon Marine. He was hardcore. So anyway, and I'm in handcuffs again. They beat me again. My dad's there this time. My mom. I'm in the kitchen, and I'm just sitting there, and I'd say nothing. I'm like, I'm going to jail again. I just know it. But this senior cop just told everyone to shut the F up, and I'm like, he goes, Jimmy, I think I know what's going on here. You're probably beat and beyond more all the time. I just looked at him like someone finally saw it because I was always hoping someone would rescue me. And he asked me, he goes, do you want to have your parents arrested? And I'm like, man, and I wish could say I was noble, but I was afraid what would happen if I said yes, what they would do to me. I said no, but can I go? And he said yeah. So I just went over to this park where I used to just hang out in the middle of the night and just think like what's going to become of my life, just felt all alone. So I just sat over there. And then my brother reconnected with us, and he came up to visit because my mom finally let him know where we were. 'Cause she wanted to see my brother. So my brother comes up and he goes, and he saw how we were living. He goes, "You got to get out of here." I said, "I know." And I just can't leave though. You don't understand. They'll mess with my life. And then we came up with this plan. Back then, no internet, no cell phones. It was all collect calls. I had a summer job. I worked at a pizza place during the winter. In school, I had some money. So I'm going to run away. So he comes up with this plan, like, I'll buy you the plane ticket. I run away in the middle of the night. And I started slowly UPSing my stuff down, right? So I UPS stuff down that is mine. I leave that there. I get a job. I knew how to work hard because of my stepdad. So we ran the whole house. The whole house. We did dinner, laundry, garbage, everything. They did nothing. They did, and if it wasn't done, there was some pain coming your way, and it had to be done to Marine Corps standards. It was insane, and they were both. I mean, we were poor a lot. We had power shut off that because they were just mixed up people in their own way. So anyway, so I run away. I get a job at Telecable TV. I get benefits. I knew how to work in 80 hours. I'm there for 3 weeks. These cops come out of the bushes. I'm arrested. And I have no idea what for. And I'll never forget it. This cop goes, all right. He looks at me. I'm in handcuffs. They throw me. I mean, they were brutal to me because they had a warrant, and they're exercising a warrant. I didn't know this out of Illinois. And I'm like, and he goes, do you know why you're being arrested? I said, no, sir, I don't know. He goes, a grand larceny. I said, I don't even know what grand larceny is. He said, that back then, that's theft over $300. It's a felony. I said, I even said, I stole one thing in my life. And I said, and at the time, I just had moved to Waukegan, Illinois. I was a sophomore hanging out with these guys, and they also went in a store. And we're all going to steal a nudie magazine. And I steal one that just has stories that doesn't even have pictures in it. And I felt so terrible. I was like, dang, I hated that feeling, So I'm like, that's the only thing and they said, well, the warrant came out of Illinois. And I said, well, that's my parents. He said, your parents? I said, yeah. And he goes, your parents? I said, you don't understand. I know it's them. I just know it's them. Well, they said I stole stuff that was mine. And they said they stole stuff that I didn't even take. It was just who they were. And I said, you don't understand my dad and my mom. I guarantee he went in, they said, no way, we're not doing this. And then he got him on the phone and he's telling him, he goes, that kid could rot in jail. He can get raped in jail. I just do not care. He can die in there. And he's like, this guy looked at me. He goes, man. So he tells me, okay, all right, you're not going to make bail. You have to be, because it's extradition, you're going to be taken back to Illinois, and it'll happen by 30 to 90 days because U.S. Marshals have to come get you, and it's just the way it works. So I go to arraignment, and I go in jail, and this detective just looked out for me the whole time. He just had like the people in the jail in Broward County just look after me, and I remember he told me to tell a story. You can't tell him your parents are in here. I'm 18. He goes, you're going to jail with men. Just say you're a thief. So I said, I'm a thief. I'm a thief. All this. But then this guy comes up to me, and I told you about Jimmy, and I'll never forget it because when you're in the holding cell before arraignment, you don't want to be there. No one. You look disheveled. You're a mess. You sleep the night there if there's no night court. And then this guy comes up to me. Hair perfect, black, perfect blue eyes, white crisp shirt, black. And when people come and go in this holding cell, they make a big announcement to clear the doors. So you pay attention because they don't want anyone rushing the doors. And this guy puts his hands on my shoulders, looks down at me, and I'm not a Christian. And he goes, Jimmy, why are you in here? And I told him the absolute truth. And he looked at me and he said, don't you worry, your father's going to get you out of here. And I'm thinking, man, I'm just sweating. I'm like, man, they put me in here. And then I freak out within a couple of minutes. I'm like, I just told him the truth. And I'm looking all over for him, and the guy is just gone. And I'm convinced to this day, as God and my relationship has grown, that was nothing more than an angel that came, because God got me out of there like a week later. I didn't have to go. I kept my job. Took a year to drop all those charges. So I have the domestic, the felony. There's no way I'm going to be a firefighter. I have all these arrests. I tried to be a volunteer in Florida. It was just a nightmare. So it wasn't going to happen. But I become a Christian when I'm 21. I stayed down there 3 more years, and I had this Jesus explosion in my heart. I'm like, I knew it was true because it was true. I didn't read the Bible. A friend of mine witnessed to me years ago, and that's a whole nother story. But her and a girlfriend came down, and she said, we just wanted this. I hadn't seen her since I ran away. And I kept my whole life a secret. I had to lie about scars and fractures and stitches, all that. And she just came down, and I hadn't seen her. And then I went to the beach with them. I went to this place where I would escape life. Because when I ran away, I thought I had this dream that the world would be a lot better, but it was just as empty. My real dad was a nightmare. I couldn't connect with him, so I felt all alone. But I asked Jesus in my heart. Boom, Jesus explosion. Never doubted his existence ever again. Ever. He let me feel all his splendor and glory. My faith has wandered at times, and I've struggled, but I've never doubted his existence nor my salvation. And then I become 21. I realize I need to leave, so I leave. I come back here. I don't know why. And my old boss at my old high school job says, hey, didn't you want to be a firefighter? I said, yes. He goes, taking on firefighters. And I said, they're taking on part-time firefighters. We're all career now, but back then I said, oh, okay. And I thought, and this is my first day, because I knew how to work. I needed a job. So I went there the next day. I went there right after he told me. So I went to the fire department, and I missed their orientation. And then this is the first time they gave me a quick orientation there. He said, yeah, we'll show you around. They were very friendly. And then the chief is a very tall, intimidating guy. And, and I said, can I talk to you? Because I knew what he was going to find. And God just gave me the courage to do this. So I said, you're going to find all this when you do my background. He said, okay. So he said, okay, well, we'll continue through the process. So I get through the process, and then I get a phone call, and he says, could you come in? And he has all my arrest records and everything, and just whatever else he found on me. And he goes, I just want you to know, we have 10 spots. You were the 10th applicant. To be fair to the process, I would have had to eliminate you if there was 11 or more, just to be fair. But since you were honest with me and you were direct, I didn't have to go find this and talk. He just took it and moved it over to a little desk in this classroom. I'm going to leave it here unless you give me another reason to bring it back here. And he welcomed me to the Gurnee Fire Department. And then over the years, I helped try to get those expunged and stuff like that. And so I became a Gurnee firefighter. And his name is Tim McGrath. So I'm going to get to my first walking into the firehouse. But the point is, he saw what I called the 2 P's, promise and potential. He didn't see what I was, but he had that to consider. But he saw what I could potentially become. And I think I outperformed his expectations of what I became. And it's because if you always just judge people for what they were or maybe what they could be, and it was just neat. So when I first walk into the firehouse, now this is to every firefighter, it doesn't matter what's wrong with it. You just love it, right? I remember most of our fire engines back then were just older than me, rusted, falling up. It didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. I didn't care about a pension. I didn't care about anything. I'm just going to be a firefighter. Even when I got hired full time, I was like, great. I don't even know what it really is. Didn't matter to me, None of it mattered. I just wanted to be part of something. When I was young, I just wanted to see if I could measure up and make weight. In other words, would I be a liability or would I be an asset? And I wanted to be an asset. I wanted to be someone they could count on and they could trust. And I wanted to be silent, but I wanted to be present. I wanted my voice to matter if asked. But I just wanted to let them know how excited I was to be there. And my perspective, then the firehouse for me, because I didn't share my story till much later in life because it's embarrassing to talk about. How do you tell people your parents had you arrested? How do you tell people you were sexually violated by family? How do you say that? And as a man, it's just messed up. But God gave me the courage later to do it. But the firehouse, I would learn from the firefighters before me and how to become a man. I would study them. And one of them was my favorite, Tim Tanner, just the way he conducted himself. He was a senior firefighter, but he just treated everyone with respect. And the culture at that time was very belittling. But he knew, and he would admit when he made a mistake or he wasn't present on a call. And he set the tone. I'm like, I want to be like him. And then I realized I just loved how he communicated. I loved how he was as a father. I loved how he was as a husband. He was loyal. He had a special needs daughter. Just everything that guy, and he never lost focus on the mission or what he needed to do for his family or what he needed to do for his fellow firefighters. I remember running to the promotional lists to see how he would do because you just knew he was worthy of the position. That was a guy I would follow with the rank or without the rank or just as a man. He just left an everlasting impression. And there was other ones too that I took bits and pieces. Then of course there was the ones which you probably can relate that you're like, I don't know if I learned from them, but that's not what I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? And then yeah, and God used the fire service to raise me into the man that I am, but Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and the Father, God just wrapped it all together. I always say if the triangle, there's the fire triangle, but there's the God triangle, and if I stay center mass in that triangle and I keep them protecting me and I lean into them all equally, I find balance. And I don't know, man. God is good. I have more than I ever thought. Like you said, I think to keep balance with my family. In the beginning years, my wife did not work at all. She did not work. We stayed at home. We were blessed. God provided. And then church called her up to like when the boys were in school, like middle school, like, hey, would you mind being a part-time secretary for the youth program? It would just be like 4 hours. It was during the day. And now they're gone. And now she was an HR person, and now she helps out with that. So yeah, I don't know, but sorry, that was probably a lot, but I didn't know how to make it
No,
short.
that is, Chief. That is a very moving story, and I think that people will definitely resonate with that because everybody has their own story of hardship, and they have something that they have to overcome. And uh, our story is a testimony. A friend of mine, Jeremy Sanders, he says that there is purpose in pain, and God can use our testimony to be a blessing to others. And it stinks, it sucks to go through all that, to be in the middle, but you're blessing me with this story, and I hope and I'm sure that you're going to bless other people who are going to hear this story. So although it was terrible for you, I believe God can bring beauty from ashes. And just your testimony of resiliency, of going through all that, and yet becoming the person that you are, the man that you are, the husband, the father. And one of the things that I always say, it's not just about being a good husband, a good father, a good fireman. It's about being the father that God has called you to be, the husband that God has called you to be, the fireman that God has called you to be. And with that idea of calling, we already talked a little bit about it in the beginning about firefighting is more than just a job, right? We call it the job, but firefighting truly is more than a job. It's about a calling. And one of the things that we as Christians believe is that God doesn't call the equipped; He equips the called. So how did you see your calling in the fire service for that?
God met me every part on the way because I was a baby Christian, number one. And I always say this, and you said it. We all come in, and I always say this. We all come in the firehouse with what I say an invisible suitcase full of who we really are, and it gets unpacked. You expose who you really are, no matter what you say in your interview and everything. You do everything right, but you become very, very exposed. And I realized I had trust issues because of the way I grew up. Like I was very non-committal to meet people out socially. I know maybe I'd show up, maybe I wouldn't, because I've lived on my own ever since I was 18. And I'm a loner, wrong, right, or indifferent, but it's just the way it did it. And then I became very good at becoming a firefighter, because we had to be both, and I got good at it. And then I became a little like I was the standard. I became arrogant. But I felt like I wasn't a team player and all this. And I just was realized, man. And then we had this terrible accident at the firehouse where one of my best friends, who was a Christian, got burned in the firehouse. We had an oxygen cylinder let go in a ambulance. NASA did a huge investigation. It was with the regulator. He was burned with 3,000 degrees, caught his uniform on fire. All this was in the burn unit. Thought he was going to die, that sort of thing. And then God did a paradigm shift in me, and I realized how everyone mattered in the world. That was probably significant to me, where I realized I could be good and great at this job, and I could achieve so much, and but if I did not care for the people around me the way I needed to, just not making the standard what I thought it should be, but just accepting people, like maybe in this skill, my ceiling's here, but someone else is here, but that's as high as they can go, and that's okay. And I just didn't get that. But that humbled me. And I remember I watched all these people care for my friend Bob Zerba as he's laying in the burn unit in Milwaukee and all this. And everyone from the orderlies to the nurses to the nursing assistants to the burn people to the surgeons to the nurses to everyone, to the breathing therapist, all of it. They all just showed love and respect, and everyone's job mattered. And then I thought, how many of these people have been in my town or similar that are going to take care of people that I was kind of maybe not as compassionate to, maybe not as kind to. And then I even thought my fellow firefighters. And then every firefighter that came in to see him, and I had got used to it, because this was the thing. My chief assigned me to the hospital, and I lived up there for 2 weeks, and I handled all the guests, everyone coming in, and it changed me because I got used to it. I saw things so different. So his wife would stay up there. I would go, his kids would come up, grandma would watch them, and I just dealt with everyone coming in. And I remember the firefighters. The department was really divided at the time. And this tragedy united the whole department. And I saw their faces when they came in to see Bob. And there's more to that story, but that really showed me a thing about change. Now, as a Christian, one of the things is the behavior in the firehouse, right? And I remember, some of the things, they watch or whatever the case may be. And I never was like promiscuous when I was young or anything like that. So I just didn't have any skills, like, because of how I grew up. I liked girls, but I didn't know how to make it all work. I just didn't have that gift. I mean, I dated a lot. I did some stuff, but I wasn't a pursuer. If they pursued me, it worked, but I didn't need to get caught up in a lot of bad behavior that way. But there was certain things you could get involved in, and going out and drinking and stuff. When I was young, I did a lot of that with the guys. And when I first started, I realized I knew I was saved, but God wasn't my first love. And that really that changed everything. And that thing to the hospital helped. And I realized this. I realized I did not know how to love as a man. And a lot of people are like, well, what does that mean, right? Because people think of Hollywood and all that. What I really mean, I didn't know how to love because I didn't know how to trust. And if I didn't know how to trust, I wouldn't know how to actually let people in and just be vulnerable and be okay if I didn't know something. The fire service I grew up in, you had to know everything. Everyone criticized you if you did something wrong, if they were on the call. So you had all these insecurities. I had all these insecurities from when I grew up. So it's all bubbling out. And then as a Christian, I'm like, man, for me to be great at this, I need to love everyone I serve with and love people I don't even know. And I just need to figure that out. So then what God did, and I went to him and I said, all right, teach me. I tried counseling. It didn't work. I couldn't open up because I was so broken. And he just took me down a road for 3 years. I call it my desert time. And he made me remember things from my childhood that I did not want to remember. I saw myself outside of the experience going, I don't want to remember this. And I didn't sleep for 8 days in a row. I'll never forget it. And then in that time, I was so broken, but God became my best friend, my father, my mother, my best friend, everything. He became everything to me. And I had this aha moment. I said, all right, you have to be first. I have to love you and realize how much you love me so I can love. It took me 3 years. And I had this aha moment. Best day of my life, becoming saved. Second best day, most people think it's my wedding. It's when God became my first love. And I remember someone asked me, they said, I turned 40 and my wife threw me a big party and said, hey, someone said, what's it like turning 40? I said, it's just another day. I really haven't thought about it. So I broke my life down to 10-year increments, and my childhood and everything, first 20 were awful. But I have to admit, when I looked at my best life, it was when God, not when I was saved, but it's when God became my first love. What I mean is he became everything to me. He just became everything to me. I'm like, I get it. You got this. And then I got to relax. Now, on a serious note, with first responders, I remember my first kid that I saw killed, and we worked and became a donor. That was hard to make sense of. But I remember I was like, God, just help me understand this. I know I'm going to see so many more, you know? And he just whispered to me, he said, Jim, the way he does, no audible voice, but just that Holy Spirit thing. He just said, everyone's going to die in this world. No one's cheating death. But my biggest concern is how many people are going to cheat themselves out of heaven. This gets me because this is how I started my day. Every day at the firehouse, especially when I became a battalion, I'd show up, I'd run like 3 or 4 miles on the treadmill there. I was always first one there for my shift, and I prayed for all my firefighters by name, their wives by name, and their kids by name. I knew our department, we had like 70 firefighters. I knew everyone's spouses and everyone's kids' name. I just, because I realized they're the most important thing. I realized when I was young, when I was describing who I was, I knew more about my job. I knew more about that engine and how to pump it, my paramedic protocol, than the firefighter that sat next to me every day. That he could save my life, I could save his, or we'd save a life together. I didn't even know his kids' names. And after that burn moment, I just like, I'm going to know these guys. And I just need to become more like Jesus in that way. And I remember I went to a lot of firefighters and said, hey, I'm sorry, man. I could have done that a little different, a lot better. But just forgive me, And it was cool. And I'll say this. I remember when I had my walkout, I asked my sons a few weeks before that. We were on a trip somewhere, and I just wanted to know. I said, hey, did I ever create an atmosphere of fear for either one of you? Did you ever fear me? Because they're men now, 20 and 22. And they said, no, not at all. I never. uh and then this is the thing too, and I'll get back to the other thing. This just took me here. um you know Firefighters, because they did say, I said, well, if there's anything I could have done different. They said this to me. They said, Dad, you could tell, like, came off of 24, you really weren't present for a long time, like the first few hours, and like maybe that night, and then like you didn't want to do a lot, like you wanted to see if you could catch up on sleep, and you could tell you were stressed about sleeping. For the next shift, and then 12 hours before the next shift started, if not 14, my mind's already on shift. I'm already like, okay, this is who I have on this is what I'm doing this day, or this is what I have to do even as a firefighter. And you just started processing, and you just missed out. And then they see the difference now that I'm retired. It's like, I don't know how you make it right unless you love your wife and your wife loves you. And those of you who are females and you have your husbands and that sort of thing, you just have to have, your wife has to be in it, and you have to make up things. You're going to miss birthdays, but it doesn't mean you can't do it the next day. That sort of thing. It took me down another road, but all I know is that in the end, when it came down to, what I learned from that experience where that firefighter was burned, was that, and that death of that child, for me, I just realized love is the secret. And when I did my walkout, I remember I told my wife said, "What do you want to be remembered for?" I said, "I loved my guys and my gals. That's all I want to be remembered for." You talked about bios. I was on every team there could be. USAR, I did it all, right? But none of that matters when you walk out the door. None of it. It's who you were, and hopefully you left steps that influenced, and I would do my best to love and show them. And there are times you just have to have broad shoulders, and you'd go in your room and you'd feel like crap. I go in my room because I had my own room as a BC, and you'd be like, man. And I just go drive around and you just get your head right, because you can't, if you I just never wanted to lash out with emotion, especially in that role. You know what I mean? And if I did once or twice, and maybe that was it, I had to apologize. I handled that aggressively, and I could do that over, but I was just a safe place. you know, um, and God just made me, and I'll say this, when I turned in my paperwork, I turned it in the morning of my 57th birthday. October 2nd, I go to this place called Lake Geneva by me where I go write poetry. I sit out there, didn't write a stitch of poetry. God just spoke to me, and he made me sit like he let me just reflect my career. Like he just made me enjoy it. Like you did good. You did well. Well done, good and faithful servant. And if and I'll say this, in the middle of it, it's so hard to feel that because when your fire department feels like it doesn't care, or you're broken in it and you're sinking and you just want someone to reach out a hand and pull you out. Your fellow firefighter is the key to it all, but your relationship with Jesus, those of you who don't have it, I get why you're on the fence, or you're just like, I don't need it. I was that guy. Do it. I'll say this. I remember once I was getting ganged up because I'm the Christian, at the firehouse, and they're trying to convince me how I'll, trade my faith in. I'm like, nah, I don't think so. And, and one of the secretaries like, nah, you're not going to get them to change, because she was an older lady and she was just awesome. And she went to the same church I went to. And I remember I'm praying, I'm like, Lord, how am I going to, because they're saying this and they're trying to make me defend my faith, and God just gave this to me, and I said, all right, this is what I got for you. I said, this is what I said. All right, right now, and there was 9 of them, right? They were just all over me. I said, all right, and it was fun. It wasn't, but they're trying to break me. I said, all right, I'll just say this: if you ask Jesus into your heart to be your Lord and Savior, and ask him to forgive you for your sins with a sincere heart, you come to him to a place where you're broken, or you're just like, you know what, I just know I need this. You tell me it's not true. You could have heard a pin drop. They didn't know what to say. It was just silent. And you said something. I forgot how you worded it, but it's the same thing. I've heard it said like this: God does not care about your availability or your ability, but your availability. And I forgot how you worded it in the beginning. And I'm like evangelism, whatever, like I'm praying, like, Lord, help me say this. And in that moment, it worked. And I've been in so many moments and to share, who Christ is. And it does not offend me that people don't believe, right? And I would say to others, don't be offended that I believe, or at least ask yourself, if it offends you, why? You For you to internalize that, because it shouldn't, But I will say this: my fellow firefighters, man, I I prayed for their salvation every day I served. Um, and there's a Christian. I said, it's your job to take over now for my shift, for our shift, and it was good. I don't know if that answered anything, but yeah.
Chief, that is perfect, because we're, as a firefighter who's Christians, we don't want to Bible thump people. We just want to share the good news. That's why it's called the good news. One of the reasons why I started the podcast, you already mentioned, we have to prioritize these things, because, and you said it yourself, when you had God in the center of everything that you did, things got better. The job got better, home got better, your relationship with your kids got better. I truly believe that with God at the center of it, everything just gets better. And one of the things that you said, that you prayed for the firefighters because you wanted that same sense of joy, that happiness, that feeling of that relationship with God. And I believe the reason why you did is I've heard you say that firefighters are the best part of the job, right? And you even joked about, you said that you and your brother, you joke about having your hero day, because to people, we're all heroes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we are heroes to people. So share a little bit about, firefighting being the special part of the job, and how people see us as that as well.
I think, first of all, I think the thing firefighters have to remember, I think they know it, but I think they should appreciate it and acknowledge the accountability and responsibility we have. When you're a firefighter for whatever organization, you're a firefighter on and off duty, 365 days a year. You're always a firefighter. And you have to conduct yourself to a level of honor and nobility that makes you worthy of that title. World, like what we think an emergency is, man, your leg has to be cut off before one of us is going to call 911. But if someone's leg aches, they're going to call us for whatever reason. But that, to them, especially if they're not frequent flyers, so I get that world, the abuse, but if they're, people just They expect when you show up, doesn't matter what shield you have, what patch you wear, they see the firefighter. You usually have one chance to leave an everlasting impression of the American or the World Fire Service. And however you are, you will leave a taste of reality. And you have the obligation to do it. Now, even in your neighborhood, you live as a firefighter. My neighbors come by, "Oh, I have this problem, that's, you go and do, you just solve it. You just figure it out. Firefighters are fixers. And I will say this, when you put on your uniform, there was a firefighter and he retired and he was amazing. He was the Optimate Blue Shirt. Bill Hoyer was his name. Way he looked, like, I believe, first of all, mental and physical fitness. Honestly, I even took the CPAT test just to see if just to show my guys I could do it, at like 51, right? Easy, right? Because I've kept myself.
That's my goal.
Yeah, you have to stay fit. Don't let the old man or old woman in. Don't let them in. Push away from the eat healthy. If you're not a runner, be a walker. If you're, get on a spin bike. It's and it just the endorphins release. That, I'm telling you, you just get mentally sharp. I would work out twice every shift, regardless. And then sometimes when I got off in the morning, I'd get my morning workout. I'd do 3 in a shift. I'd show up before shift. I'd do the workout when the guys and gals would all work out. I'd hang out there. So you want to keep that right. And then you want to be the example, right? And there's calls, and I get it. It stinks, but you just have to do it, because the moment you become physically unfit to do the job, you start to become jaded. You kind of devalue yourself then. You know what I mean? And then honestly, you want to look the part. It doesn't mean, and I say this with all respect, I think of football, I think of even baseball. There are some full-figured pitchers, and there are some there's people that are meant to be full linemen, right? They're athletes. If you're meant to be big boned, but be in shape, that's all I'll say, whatever that looks like. Never put yourself in a position where you're not physically fit to do the job, because it could cost you or someone else that you don't know, or a fellow firefighter, a very bad day. And the worst case scenario is death, just because you didn't take care of yourself. And if your department doesn't support it, that's, you don't feel like, oh, they don't give you enough time. That's just excuses. Because I know this, you did anything most likely to get hired. It took me 3 years to get hired full time. I test after test after test. You just don't let the negativity in. That's what I'd say. And then when you're off duty, you know what? Just remember, if you have that union sticker in your back, or or a license plate that says firefighter, you represent. And when you're out at a tavern, if you're out to dinner, if you're out whatever, just conduct yourself the best way you can. Because firefighters, when a fire engine is going down the street, or an ambulance, I always tell my guys this, like, a big thing to me is driving safe, right? If you're driving recklessly, we won't get there. And then you take the billboard of the fire department, which is the apparatus. People see it. It's a sense of comfort, a sense of peace. But if you create an accident or anything like that, or you do anything bad in that vehicle, but when they see it, it's a sense of hope. When you show up, no matter what's going on in their life, they're just thankful you're there. Now, there are some with domestic issues or drug issues, or people who are just going to fight you and all that. But in most cases, that's the minority. In a lot of cases, people are just glad you're there to do something, even in the simplest things. Be a servant. And I mean it. That's all you are. I always tell, when I teach leadership classes over the years, or firefighter classes, whatever it is, you are nothing more than a servant to those in need. And you must humble yourself, check your pride, be vigilant, and train. I'm a big trainer. If you do not train for this job, if you do not train and prepare and pre-plan, and always think of plan A, plan B, and plan C. Great, there's good firefighters, don't get me wrong, and some of them don't have it, but great firefighters are always thinking of the what ifs. The what ifs. If this happens, this is what, even before the call happens. I would challenge guys, you go on a rescue call, when you're going into a cookie cutter, like, say, residential area or whatever, just kind of look at the house. If the situation isn't crucial or, intense, what if there was a fire here? Where are the stairs? Where's the bathrooms? Look at the windows, that sort of thing. You're always training yourself. And I realized how much I always was doing that when I was off duty. And now that I'm retired, I still do it, but nowhere near as much. And then most firefighters too, you can't escape where bad things happen, because a lot of people, you always go back to the same battleground, so to speak, or you live in that town. And the bad memories or whatever the case may be, or the things, some people just brush it off. Guys all handle it different, and never think less of someone who's struggling with mental health. That's one of the weaknesses in the fire service today. I think they're trying to make it right because there's pressure to do it, but I don't know if every firehouse is making that good and making that available for firefighters. Honestly, even the spouses and the things they go through when think about it. I'm sure you can relate to this. Sub pump goes out, or whatever the hot water heater blows when you're on duty, right? And I know we have a bunch of firefighters who call, they come over, they take care of it, whatever. But it's just you're not there. When that bad storm comes through, but you're saving everyone else, and then you're fried, you come home and you're like, and then you just got to be Superman. And my wife would always say to me, and it was convicting, bet you don't treat your firefighters like this. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And she would because I would be firm, or tired, I'm not proud of that, but my wife is amazing. I wouldn't be married if it wasn't for who God put me with. I'll just say that. So.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you about your wife, your relationship with her. She's obviously with you for this whole time in the fire service. So a lot of times our wives end up living like single parents. They have the kids while we are at work, things break. They got to run the kids to school, run the kids to sports. One of the things that my wife talks about is a lot of times when I come back home, I mess up the whole system because she has a system for when I'm not there. So
Mm-hmm.
how did you deal with that for the last 35 years? And also perhaps you could share a little bit on the other side now. How do you reintegrate yourself? I'm assuming you're back in the house now at full time. So does she tell you to
Oh
get out
yeah.
of the house for 24 hours at a
No,
time?
I
So
think she misses. I think she does miss it. I'll say this. Okay, I'll start with my wife. I'll start with that. Like I'm a loner, and when we first got married, because of all the baggage I came with, I had trust issues. She said, "Man, your heart. I could tell you put these walls up. You physically change." And she goes, "You just get hard, And I'm like, and she would say that, and she's like, you need to work on that. And so she would just teach me. She would teach me how, you always think of the worst because of how you grew up, and she got it, and she helped me with that and navigated. She was always like Christ to me, though. She's even keel. Oh, she's not too high, not too low. If I married another woman, and she knows I need to be by myself a lot, like to go right, get my head right, and she was good. And I think we just became close, right? She's like my best friend. In fact, at my walkout, I gave her my first firefighter badge when I got hired full time and said, "You've been my firefighter for all these years, and I want you to have this." And I just honored her in front of everyone because that's who she's always been good. Now, when it comes to the 24 on, I could tell she appreciated me being gone. She'd get time to herself, that sort of thing, which is fine. Like because we don't have to smother each other. We just know how each other work, so that was good. So we've never had any big issues except one time in our marriage where I just got disconnected, and I'm like, man, I don't know if I want to be married anymore. I mean, I remember telling her that, and she's like, and there was nothing else going on. I said, you can have everything. I just was like, and it was weird. I just became so disconnected, the job, everything, like my past and everything. And it never got very far, but that was the worst thing we ever went through. Right. But there was no yelling. There was no, I just became like who I used to be growing up, just shut people off. Like I don't need anyone. I don't know what the trigger was. Don't know. But that was the hardest thing we went through. And then I would say we just became closer and closer. And then like it's funny, like big snowstorms would come. She would shovel. I would say that she'd be out there because we were a shoveling family, not a snowblower family. She no matter how heavy it was, she would do it, and she was good. She was very good about going to the store. I'd go to the store. I cook a lot of the meals. Like she likes to bake, and I'll cook. We always work that out. When it came to balancing the kids, I just feel like she would have other parents she would deal with, or I would come, and I could tell a lot of times because we would just drive separate. and say, okay, because she wanted to get there at a certain time instead of art, I'm like, well, I'll go, I'll just meet you there. It was just down the street, but it just worked. Because you know what I mean? We just never, she'd be in her car, I'd be in hers. And she would social, like I always wanted to, like, because the way I grew up, no one ever really supported me. And I don't know if this is wrong or right, but when I go to my kids' games, I just wanted to watch my kids. I didn't want to have conversations with the other parents until after. So I would go stand in the corner and I just wanted to watch everything they did and cherish it. Like I wanted to be their biggest fan, right? So that was that. And then when things went wrong, she would call me and she always got scared. Like it was weird, like when bad storms would come in. And she would call me in the middle of the night sometimes. And I remember I'd be running calls because, we'd get these terrible, like almost like tornadoes and little small tornadoes in our town. And she's just like, I'd be praying with her on the phone. I'm talking on the radio, trees are flying by the car, that sort of thing. And we just did it. Now when I retired, like I still have a lot of, a lot of time, to myself or whatever, but I could tell she wants time to herself. So I'll just go out and go meet a friend or something and we just make it work. But I will say this, because where you're at in your life and anyone who's there, because it's all about your kids, right? Your kids just kind of own the home, but it's beautiful when your kids move on. You will mourn that in a way. It sounds like you will, because you just love them, but you reconnect with your spouse. Like it's pretty cool. Like you just reconnect. Don't be, a lot of people say, be afraid of it. What are you going to do? Just be intentional about hanging out with each other. Yeah, I think I don't know if we were wrong, but I feel like we were both comfortable with just doing everything for our kids. Like we always felt bad, like, oh, hey, we'll go out tonight. We had date nights, but not tons. We could have done more, but we're like, I don't even want to bring the kids. And I don't know if that hurt us or not, but it did no permanent damage. It's not even a thing. But yeah, life's pretty good.
That's beautiful, Chief. Like you said, when you're intentional with what you're doing, be intentional with your wife, be intentional with your kids, and being honorable to God, having God be in the center of your family, everything works beautifully. So I would love to have this opportunity with you again. There are so many things that I had written down as you were talking that I wanted to pick your brain on, that we're going to have to do this again. But before we go, how can people get a hold of you if they want to, have a conversation on or anything? Just reach out to you.
You can text me. That's probably the best way. Or 847-521-8825. Or my email is jpellitteri, JPELLITTE at, not Gmail, because it gets confusing, but it's Ymail. And I think Yahoo, when I signed up for it, was trying it, and I was in that loophole. So I have a Ymail address. So J Pellitteri, PELLITTERI at ymail.com. So, and I look forward to talking to anyone, and love you, brother. This was total connection, and God is good.
No, this is great, Chief. Thank you. I appreciate you. As I said, if you guys liked what you hear here, just share this, subscribe to the podcast. I really enjoy having these conversations. And Chief, one more time, thank you so much, and God bless.